It's the week ending Saturday, the 21st of April, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen a row over the rights of citizens who came to Britain on the famous Windrush, a woman dying after a freak accident on a plane in Philadelphia, and NASA launching a new telescope into space in search of exoplanets. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me from the week's digital team are Jamie Timson, Kari, Wilkin and Arion McNicoll. And starting the show this week, it's Jamie. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This was the week it became even harder for Kendrick Lamar to stay humble.
Congratulations to Kendrick Lamar, honey, who became the first rap artist in history to win a Pulitzer Prize for music. This marks the first time that the award did not go to a jazz or classical artist. And so the question is, are people finally realizing that there is a cultural impact that rap has had?
Whoopi Goldberg on The View this week. Well, Jamie, what she said. Are people finally realizing that there is a cultural impact that rap has had?
Yes. So this week, the Pulitzer Award, which actually goes for many more things other than, I think the kind of main thing when the news came out was everyone was like, there's a Pulitzer for music?
Yeah, I didn't know.
The Pulitzer Prize, which has only ever gone to classical and jazz composers, has gone to Kendrick Lamar for his most recent album, Damn.
Famously snubbed at the Grammys.
Famously snubbed because Bruno Mars was possibly more acceptable to a widescreen audience. He's always available. That's the thing about Bruno Mars. Always available. And, as we are approaching the 50th anniversary of when hip-hop first originated, generally thought of as being originated, which is in the 70s in the Bronx. And, one argument says that it says more about the Pulitzer than it does about hip-hop. Mm-hmm. Hip-hop has just been doing its own thing these past generations, and now the Pulitzer's saying, oh, wow, this is a really great piece of music, and we're going to, cynically, people could suggest that they were wanting to open, and it's good publicity for the Pulitzer to choose someone like Kendrick Lamar, but also, I think it just shows the kind of the move that hip-hop has made from being what was, quite snobbishly referred to as urban music.
Yeah, street music.
To what is now the mainstream.
Except, could it actually, Kari, not be anything to do with the Pulitzer, really, or anything to do with hip-hop and just to do with age? People who are kind of, broadly speaking, under 50 have in some way grown up with hip-hop. People who are older than that didn't. And so, as people die and people on judging panels get younger, there's going to be hip-hop listeners.
I think that's certainly an aspect of it. I think also you've got to add in the power of streaming platforms such as SoundCloud and Spotify, which have made it far easier for hip-hop stars to get their voices out to listeners. So you've no longer got those gatekeepers of the record label bosses who are deciding what is and isn't acceptable. And also, I think there's a lot of disenfranchised youth at the moment, and youth has always defined what is popular in music. And there's a lot of people who are feeling that they're not heard, that there's, still a lot of racial tensions, that immigration policies are sort of going against black people and people of other cultures in America. And I think this is a good way to get heard. I think it combines a lot of different factors.
Yeah, you don't want to be a cultural institution in America that appears to be on the wrong side of Black Lives Matter. And Kendrick Lamar is sort of poster child for that movement. At the same time, he is writing, obviously, clearly great stuff.
Definitely. But before you even get to the politics of it, it is curious that, as Jamie said, this is the 50th year that rap has existed by some counts. If you're talking about the Pulitzer having finally caught up, it's very late to the party after 50 years of not acknowledging it.
At least it did it. The Grammy snubbed hip-hop in basically all 4 of the big general field categories this year.
Well, that's true, but even your previous suggestion that it took streaming services to bring hip-hop to a wide audience. That's not true. When we were kids,
I think it's always been
hip-hop preceded. Sure, I grew up in Australia listening to NWA and then sort of Snoop and West Coast rap. And
despite being a white guy in Australia, I bet as a kid it was still, if you're of that generation, thought of basically as black music that you were into. This is the music I like and this is the black music I like. And I guess maybe what's changed is in America, that distinction isn't as obvious anymore. White people don't just listen to country and black people don't just listen to rap.
But did we have that when we were kids? I felt like...
No, but I'm saying it was categorised that way still. You walked into HMV, it was, wasn't it?
I think music as a whole has got a lot less pigeonholed into genres, and I think that's been a factor. And I think with the streaming, it's just... you might have listened to it, but your average sort of white dad living in the suburbs maybe hadn't. Whereas if he's now using streaming services, it's there in front of him rather than him having to go to a record store and actually go wander into the rap section, which he probably wouldn't have.
Hip hop is a much more dynamic genre than any other genre at the moment. It reacts immediately to it. The whole industry is primed around singles. Yes, this was an album that was incredibly intricately created, but there are countless other. Kendrick is almost a kind of outlier in this industry because there are countless others who come through with a great song, like a really, really great song that reacts to like the public consciousness and the way people are feeling almost immediately. Something can happen on a Thursday and on the Tuesday there'll be a song referencing that thing happening coming out on Tuesday, and it's not about touring, it's not about merchandise, and that's what I think people have really cottoned on to. When we're in a much more immediate age now, we're in a much more... Hip-hop is kind of like the news feed genre. Which, rock and pop
it's kind of like a musical Twitter, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
There's also, and I'm not saying Kendrick Lamar is the first hip-hop artist to do this, but it's also the fact that his albums are albums with a capital A, aren't they? They're listening experiences, beginning, middle, end. They're thought of conceptually. And you could say with hip-hop in the past, like, albums have weird skits in them. They're full of misogynistic and, arguably sort of racist content, actually. And they promote a gangster lifestyle. You can sort of understand why the Pulitzer wouldn't have awarded that.
But that's just...
Yeah, I think that's quite lazy stereotyping in lots of ways.
But
I understand
a lot of
what
classic
saying.
hip-hop albums could be described that way.
Yeah,
and they're not going to have won a Pulitzer.
Lots of classic rock albums. David Bowie was off his face on cocaine doing leading TV shows. Pete Townsend was out of his mind while he was writing these things. That black people have been marginalised because they're doing the same things that white rock stars have been doing, but they're black. And I think that, yes, Pulitzer, lots and lots of awards have looked at it and said, this is the problem with, you only have to look at Bill O'Reilly saying that, the reason that there was more divorces was because it was due to rap music. Huge things that just aren't related that people have been able to pigeonhole because it's different, because it's an othering of a culture. But they've also really celebrated, this is what I think is a really good thing that's happened in hip-hop recently, is that they've celebrated individualism. Chuck D called it CNN for black people, and it really is, because it's an individualization, and it's taken over the mainstream culture by basically celebrating people's differences.
And I think rap's also welcomed in white rappers. I mean, I know there's still sort of quite a lot of controversy about that, but it's now a lot easier for anyone to make rap music in the sense you've got the technology to just create a beat on a computer and then put your voice over it. So it's attracted a wider variety of people to it.
I think also if you look at even the snubbing of Kendrick Lamar at the most recent Grammy Awards, at least his name was in the mix, and it's not the first time that he has lost out on Album of the Year. He also lost with To Pimp a Butterfly.
Actually, I think all of his major label releases have lost.
Have been nominated and lost, that's right. But I think that we're seeing hip-hop albums at least being mentioned in those lists of the best of. And equally, you look at an event like Coachella, there was a lot of writing this week about the fact that Coachella has been pretty much now overtaken by hip-hop artists. And that's where music is at these days.
Okay, so but back to my point that I made a minute ago. There is a sort of problem with a lot of music, including Kendrick Lamar's, for a family audience, isn't there? You give something the Pulitzers. I'm thinking back to the Brits, and if you watch the Brit Awards this year, Kendrick Lamar did a performance. It was unwatchable on telly because they bleeped out every N-word, they bleeped out every swear word. He did this sort of arty performance where he didn't say anything for 2 minutes anyway. And the whole thing just was, I mean, if you hadn't heard of him, and I had, and I know his music, but if you hadn't, you'd think, what the hell is this?
But what about the likes of Noel Gallagher? You had to bleep out everything he said.
Are we now at a stage, if he's winning the Pulitzer, are we now at a stage where actually ITV should be broadcasting 4-minute-long Kendrick Lamar uncensored songs at 9 p.m?
I think if you are able to give viewers and people the benefit of the doubt that says that this is a work of art that contains, in the same way that you have 18 certificates on adult, Kendrick Lamar...
Show a Tarantino film.
Kendrick Lamar is not writing these songs specifically for a children's audience. So to kind of force him to kind of sit within the parameters of what I think you just have to say, viewer discretion. You know, this guy is creating art that may be offensive to some people, but, you know, he's been offended all his life by the boring kind of white music that comes out every day.
And as Jamie said, it's not as though this is confined to rap. I mean, if you've ever tried listening to music in a car with kids, you suddenly realise pretty much every song has swearing in it. So this is across the genres.
You've reminded me now of my English teacher at school, Dennis Ricks, who got me to, I suppose burn would be the the word that was used, but this was pre-CD burning, got me to make a mixtape, I guess, of the entire album of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill, but without any songs that involved sex, so that he could give it to his 8-year-old daughter because she liked Alanis Morissette. And I think it was 3 tracks. Yeah. Now, in terms of sort of representation of kind of mainstream African-American artists, big week as well in terms of Coachella, wasn't it? So Coachella's music festival is basically Glastonbury, isn't it, but in the States?
Yeah.
And who was headlining?
Beyonce.
Why was that a big deal?
She was the first black woman to headline at Coachella in its entire existence. She also did, you know, the performance was amazing, generally regarded, but a lot of the hallmarks of the performance called back to very traditional black music. So there was the use of a college marching band from what was an all-African-American college. And yes, a lot of the references and the tropes were about black culture and black heritage. And that was really important because Coachella has for a long time been seen as a white music festival, solely for quite rich white people to go and experience. And I guess that's another example of how the turning point, you know, I would say that perhaps it's not that hip-hop has changed in some way to become part of the mainstream or whatever. I actually think that the mainstream has just decided that this is something that we want to co-opt or to celebrate. And that can be a good and bad thing, you know. I don't think it's necessarily a either or.
And it's interesting that actually Kendrick Lamar himself on his previous album, To Pimp a Butterfly, used a lot of jazz musicians and jazz tropes. Almost you wonder whether that was one of the things that caught the ear of the Pulitzer Committee and made them think, hang on, we have to pay attention to this music, quite aside from the fact that his lyrics are really smart. But yeah, the kind of looking back to the heritage of music that both Beyonce did with her Coachella performance and that Kendrick Lamar has done on several of his albums is actually a kind of positioning of hip-hop as being a genre that is not just contemporary, but based on the great history of music that has previously been regarded been thought of as great.
And you only have to look at things like Black Panther, that, you know, was an amazing hit, an amazing success as a superhero film, which is generally quite a mainstream and probably not.
Have you seen it?
American. Yeah.
Okay, so I hate superhero films. Should I see it? Everyone keeps saying what a significant cultural moment is, but as someone who hates superhero films, I had no reason to see the African American one.
Yeah, I probably still think you're not going to like it.
Okay. But yes, there is clearly a sort of cultural shift going on. The question is this just a moment in time now, and in 10 years' time we'll look back at it and say, oh yeah, that was the 2-year period where everyone was talking about including African-American influences into mainstream culture? Or is this a significant turning point that will have lasting impact?
I really hope that it is a significant, that will have lasting impact. You know, what I hope at least is that it will mean that every other genre wants to step up its game, from a music perspective at least, and more of a kind of cross-cultural, cross-genres, and much more interesting, you know. I don't think anyone can listen to Damn or even some of the songs itself and not think these are great songs. They might not be your favourite thing to listen to, but it's great art. And so I hope in 10 years' time we will look back and say, yeah, this was the point where it did become the thing.
Arion, you're next. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
India is reeling this week following a particularly brutal crime.
2 rape stories of rapes on minors that hit the headlines, and the anger in the country bubbled over. Questions being raised on the silence of the centre, of the Prime Minister, and now the news coming in. On both the big stories, the Prime Minister spoke out today saying that the daughters of India will get justice. The Prime Minister addressing a gathering on the eve of Ambedkar Jayanti.
A breaking news report by India Today earlier this week, where President Modi broke his silence over 2 cases of injustice facing Indian citizens. Arion, get us up to speed with this.
The first case, and the one that's really captured the attention of Indian media at least, but weirdly not the rest of the international media, has been this case that occurred in January this year of a young girl whose name was Asifa Bano, who was 8 years old and was kidnapped by a group of 6 men gang raped and then killed. At first, the crime was really not reported about for a good week or so, and only in the last couple of days have we started to see the full details of the real horror of that crime.
I mean, I don't want to disturb listeners, but just give us a sense of some of those grim details that have come out in the last week or so.
Well, that she was kept for 3 days, and this group of men kept her alive so that they could keep raping her, and then ultimately she was killed in a not very nice way.
And that one of the men was a police officer?
4 of the men were police officers,
right, okay.
Or at least 4 of the men accused of the crime are police officers,
wow, yeah.
And one was a former government official. And that is the bit of the new information that's emerged following the charges actually being laid.
And then what's the second story? You said there were 2.
And there were 2. And the other one was a 17-year-old woman who accused a member of the ruling BJP party of having raped her. Her story was not believed and went nowhere until her father went to the police station to try to get some attention put on it. He was beaten and then killed. Those 2 cases together have led to widespread and increasingly violent protests around the country. And through the middle of it, and what we heard in that report just kicking off this piece, was that up until even the last couple of days, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has been entirely silent on the whole issue.
And is that new? I mean, I hate to be cynical about something so serious, but I mean, India has a rape problem. We've seen stories like this before. What's the turning point here?
Yeah, there's 2 things that are meeting, 2 big forces that are meeting in this story. One is India's ongoing rape crisis, which really emerged in 2012 when a woman in Delhi was raped and there was gang raped and killed, and there were huge protests at the time, and the laws at that stage started to change. And the BJP has been regarded by in some quarters as having made steps, at least in that regard. But the particularly concerning aspect of the Asifa Bano case, this 8-year-old girl, is that it looks as though what motivated the crime is that she was Muslim and the people who kidnapped her were Hindus. There's a cover-up that appears to be going on that's based on that religious tension between Hindus and Muslims, and obviously Narendra Modi's party is Hindu, and ministers have even attended some of the demonstrations in support of the people who have been accused of the crimes.
Okay, so leaving the rape to one side for a minute, there's a question about how complicit President Modi is in the rise of sectarianism in India.
The thing about Narendra Modi's party, the BJP, is that it does have, depending on who you talk to, either a very core or a fringe Hindu nationalist support. You know, there are lots of facts about Modi. You know, just to take one small example, it was found quite recently that he followed quite a number of people on Twitter who very regularly make misogynistic and anti-Muslim comments. And when he was pressed about this, he was like, "Oh well, you know, I don't always follow the people that I, choose to follow the people that I'm followed." But every single person that he followed had written a thing directly at him, being like, "It's so good to be followed by you." You know, it gave over an impression of support that I think it doesn't look good. I think possibly also the other problem is that Modi is
is that a problem, or is it popular in India? Like, from our point of view, we might say, well, sectarianism's bad, but is it winning him votes?
Yes.
I mean, intimidation and violence against religious minorities have increased since he came to power in 2014, and he hasn't done a great deal about it. Even with this rape, he's in the UK this week, visiting while they try and work out a trade deal post-Brexit. And even yesterday, when he finally broke his silence about the rape, but all he said was, "Don't politicise rape," whereas in fact this rape was very clearly political. This girl was allegedly targeted because she came from a semi-nomadic Muslim tribe who'd been in the region where she was killed grazing their sheep, and they'd come into dispute with local Hindu people. And the theory is that this girl was deliberately targeted to drive this tribe away, which worked. They fled soon after the attack.
Arion.
We should remember too that Modi was the regional governor during the 2002 Gujarat riots, which was a moment where we saw a great deal of bloodshed. Over 1,000 people killed in sectarian conflict between Hindus and Muslims, and that led to Modi being this persona non grata. He was explicitly banned in 2005 by the United States from even entering the country.
By the UK as well, I believe.
Yeah, the UK completely cut ties with him. And now, this week, we're seeing Modi welcomed with open arms, the most open arms Britain has, welcoming him not only to a reception with the Queen, but also an individual meeting with Theresa May. He was met at the airport. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but by Boris Johnson, and maybe that's an insult. I don't know, but no, he was...
He's getting the red carpet treatment.
Yeah, he's getting the proper
treatment. But then, I mean, you've alluded
protests.
to why that is. It's because of Brexit, isn't it? And making sure we have a good negotiation with them. It's also because clearly there are a lot of Indians and people from that side of the world who live in the UK, and they wouldn't want to see them.
He's also been met by protesters. There's been widespread protests.
But he's also very good at saying things that make good headlines in the West. You know, there's a classic trope of Modi's is to say things like he did this week, where he sounds like that he's denouncing the thing that you want him to denounce, but actually he's being very careful with the things that he does say. And I do also think in Britain we have a real problem with kind of Orientalism in terms of India. You know, a lot of the time when people talk or think about India, it's quite a kind of hallowed view of India as this kind of like quite corny, kind of quite yoga, you know, the eat, pray, love thing, where India's the idea of praying and spiritualism and all of that stuff, which is a good way to avoid our problems that, you know.
I think a lot of people are just completely unaware, in the UK, are completely unaware of the sectarian violence in India, full stop.
Therefore, should there be pressure on our Prime Minister to ask him about this? She hasn't raised the issue yet.
I suppose he preempted her by making these comments, but she could certainly challenge, you know, he sort of said, I will take action, but he's not actually made any specific pledges. He's just promised justice.
I think that, yes, there definitely should be pressure on May to do something.
But there isn't. Something. Like, given the fact that the British public haven't expressed a great deal of interest in this, should she raise it? I mean, she's supposed to represent the British people. Should she raise it just ethically anyway?
Yes, I would like to have a Prime Minister that raises ethical objections to the things that we would not be a fan of. But considering she hasn't had a history of raising ethical objections, I don't see why she's going to start with India.
And Arion, I mean, you alluded at the beginning of this discussion to the fact that it hasn't, perhaps this story received the coverage that it deserved. Why do you think that is?
It's really unclear to me. It's such a big issue, and maybe it is because of the nature of the crime that it's not terribly pleasant to report on. I know that when I sat down to do a bit of research on this, it was something that I didn't even want to.
You don't want to read about it, do you?
No, but I don't know. I think that these things do take time, not only in the discovery of fact, and as we said earlier, that's taken a while to emerge, but then also even the reaction to it. And because the ruling party in India has been so keen to keep this as small as possible, I think it's only really this week that it's started to break, but I do think that it's going to go further.
I mean, it would have probably gone unnoticed in India if it hadn't been for the fact that a newspaper reported details of the police charge sheet when it was sent to court, and someone picked up on this because it was just being shuffled along. And it was only when it got picked up, you know, that outrage spread across social media in India particularly, and people began reacting, and that's what garnered the case attention. You know, I hate to say it, but I don't think this is by any means an isolated case. This is just the one that got noticed.
Kari, you're up next. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This is the week we asked whether staff are dressed for success.
Don't worry, the workplaces of today may be less strict about attire, but there are still guidelines. Here are my rules for dressing for interview success. Get a clear picture of the environment you're walking into. Ask someone who knows or do a Google image search. I know a Stanford grad who sat in the parking lot before his interview with a Seattle startup to check out what the employees were wearing. He really wanted the job, and he got it.
Sound advice, I'm sure. Susie Welsh there from CNBC offering her tips for dressing appropriately for a successful job interview. Kari, what's the story?
There's been an outcry this week after it emerged that a guidance handbook had been given to trainee barristers at a London-based university, the BPP University, warning them that they risk being docked points in exams for wearing short skirts or, quote, kinky boots. It said women must have nothing showing above the knee. Men can get docked a point for wearing colourful socks. Showing a bra loses you 3 points.
Yeah, you have to have a double-breasted jacket if you're a gentleman.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And no knees on chest, really.
No breasted jacket if you're...
yeah, exactly.
This guidance handbook was leaked by a legal news blog called Legal Cheek, and was widely mocked. Yeah, I think it raises interesting questions about to what extent people can be told how to dress at work.
Okay.
We've seen this arise again and again.
Let's have that discussion in a minute about what you can wear at work. And I should say, in the interests of explaining what we're all wearing right now, that three of us are in T-shirts today. I'll let you guess who's the smartest dressed. But we're talking about the court here. And, far be it from me to call the justice system conservative in nature, but isn't a dress code actually entirely sensible when you're a court professional? They are training people to present in court.
I was willing to go along with this until I got to the words kinky boots, at which point you just go, oh, for God's sake, it's such an outdated view that any woman in long boots looks like a tart, basically. It's fine.
But it does include coloured socks as well.
Exactly.
So, that's,
really?
Isn't that the male equivalent of kinky boots? I agree the word kinky is ridiculous, but they do have rules for men and women that are slightly ridiculous.
Well, I think under UK law, an employer can require their staff to abide by a certain dress code at work as long as they can justify why it's there. And obviously, a barrister, they need to dress in a certain way or they're going to be perceived in a certain way and perhaps not taken as seriously by jurors, judges, whatever. But I think, that would be down to the employer and the employee. And if they're but to bring it into an exam arena where that's not what you're being judged on, that's a side issue.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. But before we get on to the general thing about dress at work, Jamie, is it reasonable that it is what you're being judged on in your final exam as a barrister?
Not to surprise anyone, but I think this is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So the idea is that because things are conservative and have always been this way, we then have to, in the 21st century, adhere to standards that were created basically to make sure that people felt scared and worried when they were in court, so that the people who were rich could continually get away with doing the bad things, and the people that were poor didn't understand the system and so therefore were put down quicker and easier. It's absolutely nonsense that because we're in a court situation and they've decided these weird laws that then everyone should dress that way and adhere to it. Like, the 21st century is all about breaking down barriers.
But it is
all about
ties are the ultimate example. Ties are ridiculous. Doctors are banned from wearing ties at work because NHS guidelines say that
they're not hygienic.
Yeah, they're not hygienic, basically, and they perform no beneficial
function.
But
a judge is likely to be, whether you like it or not, and I'm not saying I like it, a judge is likely to be a 60 or 70-something white guy.
Yeah, okay.
But given that's the case, isn't it the responsibility of someone who's training you to be a barrister to say, you know what, if you turn up in a pink T-shirt with the Sex Pistols written on it, the judge probably won't like that.
But
that's not their place to say.
But if everyone... I've just raised my hand.
Objection, Your Honour.
Yeah. If everyone turned up in a pink T-shirt with Sex Pistols on it, he'd be the odd one out. He'd be the one that had to deal with it and change. It's the exact same way that everything changes in this world. Everyone else has a majority system where you end up all wearing what you like, and that's fine. And also, we move on. It chooses nothing. Sorry.
You're training these people to go into a courtroom and argue on behalf of someone, potentially their future. These are adults. Can they not make these decisions themselves and live with the consequences?
On that, I would say, actually, possibly not. With my experience of knowing people who work in further education, they would say that actually, if these rules weren't there, let's take an example of 20-year-olds who walk around all the time with headphones in. I could imagine a scenario where in your final exam you're still wearing your headphones whilst you're making your closing argument. Surely you should be Dr. Point for that, because that is affecting the way you're presenting.
But that affects
is
your
what
performance.
They're studying.
That affects your performance.
But it's
wearing
quite
headphones.
possible that it would happen, isn't it? If they don't stipulate this is what you've got to look like, they could lose points for something that's nothing to do with their argument.
And in fact, for better or worse, being in court is a formal environment. And it's not just the barristers and the solicitors who are told how they should dress, but
it's the defendants.
Yeah. and anyone who appears. You're meant to be there. The
irony that my phone is now ringing. Sorry. Sorry, carry on.
But the absurdity of those dress code requirements that were picked out by this school in particular that struck me was that if you look at the weird costumery that exists in court in general, wigs and gowns and all of that, that's peculiar.
It's fancy dress. And you're criticising a woman because her skirt is an inch above her knee.
And I suppose that if you take it as given that judges and barristers are always going to wear crazy wigs, then maybe it is acceptable to also require your trainee lawyers to wear sober clothing.
Let's move on to where this is naturally heading. Is a workplace dress code of any kind reasonable?
Yes.
No.
Let's have it out.
I think it's a very grey area, and I don't have all the answers. It's very complicated, but I think...
I thought you had all the answers.
I know.
What?
Sorry to destroy your view. I think if it's going to affect an employee's ability to do their job, or on health and safety grounds, obviously you've got a right to tell someone to wear a hard hat if they could get bashed by something if they don't.
Or represent the company.
Or if you're representing the company, exactly. If you're face-to-face with someone, you can't... The debate is over how far those guidelines should go. Obviously, you've got to be reasonably groomed. I was amazed, actually, when I looked into this and found out that women can be required by law to wear makeup because that's seen as being just a necessary part of grooming.
Wow.
Whereas, obviously, men aren't, although you can get makeup for men. The laws
Probably
do state that...
reverse, isn't it? Probably there would be laws saying don't wear makeup if you're a man.
And the laws do state that any dress code or appearance policy should apply to both men and women equally, although obviously they don't have to be identical, because obviously there are going to be different requirements for male staff, but it does have to amount to similar standards. And I do find that pretty amazing, that women, it could just be taken as a norm that of course a woman can't be presentable without makeup.
And Jamie, you say no, there shouldn't be a code. So you go and buy a hat. Let's say you're going to go and spend £400,000 buying a house. You're happy for that estate agent to be wearing shorts and a t-shirt and sandals? That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, have you seen some of the ill-fitting suits that they wear? They're not spending their money on good tailors.
Do you understand though why, if I'm the guy who runs that estate agency, I'd be concerned that my employees project a certain
I understand, but it's all part of a very archaic way of looking at the world, which is what I mean. It's like you're talking about it from a position of saying that what you want is equality in both cases, and it's mad that they have to wear makeup.
But not just the equality.
Yeah, but it's mad that women have to wear makeup. But you see that it comes from the same ability of people being judged on how they look, not how they act. And that's what we're feeding into here. You're saying that someone isn't able to represent their company because of the way that they look, when actually anyone
but
could...
we're not. It's not the way
not...
they look, it's the way they're choosing to look. So it's not about facial disfigurement, is it? It's about whether they're choosing to wear a revealing top or whether they're choosing to wear a t-shirt or a blazer.
But then, so then you can hire them based on the type of person that they are in terms of how they choose to act in the interview and everything else. But they should not be forced, because the idea is if you are the type of person that will wear a revealing top in a situation where it's not acceptable, then you're probably also not going to be perfect for the job in other ways. You shouldn't be forced to adhere, because you're always going to be that person, regardless of whether you're forced into these kind of like these old school, very old, boring norms.
I agree that people should not be judged on how they look, but if the fact that you are, say, someone who needs to be very organised in your profession and you turn up looking slovenly in a mess, that doesn't instill confidence.
She's looking directly at me. Just want you to know.
No.
I think all you T-shirt wearers need to lift your game, frankly.
You've outed yourself.
Sorry.
You're the only shirt wearer in the room, Arion. Well, what's your view? There you are. You're also the most senior person in the room, so maybe that tells you something.
I really don't care. Certainly in our workplace, I don't have a strong view on it. I think.
Well, but when you go for a meeting and you are representing theweek.co.uk to senior shareholders or owners in the business, then what?
I do understand that there's an expectation on me to dress up a bit. Do I think that's wrong? I sort of just put on the suit and go with it.
I think just smart. I don't think suits should come into it. I think that's where you draw the line. Suits and ties and stuff, they perform no function. You know, you see guys walking around in ties when it's sweltering hot and it looks so uncomfortable. I feel so sorry for them.
And probably, dress codes have changed in any case.
That's what I mean. I think maybe dress codes just need to be updated and to be a little bit less prescriptive.
Or just get rid of them.
Well, to be fair to the BPP as well, apparently these dress code details that have leaked online are over 10 years old. So they do intend. It's not that they think that they're necessarily to be abided by the letter now. It's just they haven't got around to updating them yet, and I think they'd acknowledge they need updating.
But you know, look at the row last June when Commons Speaker John Bercow said that MPs no longer needed to wear ties. There was a huge outcry. And there was one Tory backbencher, Peter Bone, who said that letting ministers participate in debates without wearing a tie reduces the esteem the public have for their legislature, which is obviously rubbish. But there was a big outcry, so clearly it's still an issue, and I think there's a real generational divide, and unfortunately it's the older people who've grown up with these norms that are just enforcing them because that's their norm and they haven't really thought about it. But I think it's certainly time to challenge it.
I think politicians should all have to wear ruffs.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Ruffs and high socks.
Okay, and just finally on this, Kari, I know there's another story that's related to this that you wanted to bring up. Tell us about Bracot.
Yeah, there was this student in a Florida high school, 17-year-old girl called Lizzie Martinez, who was made to cover up her nipples recently with plasters after going to school in a pretty baggy T-shirt but with no bra. and she was told she was distracting classmates. The dean, the principal, who fortunately was a woman, but still how humiliating, made her jump up and down to do a bounce test. So, you know, really pretty traumatic experience for this gal.
And she took to social media, the student, not the dean. And
the student, and said...
It went international.
It's triggered an international discussion on whether women should have to wear bras. This girl staged a bra cot at her school this week.
So that's other students in solidarity not wearing bras.
Or putting stickers on places, or I don't know, that sort of thing.
I think...
I just think, just let people wear what they want. If someone's wearing a revealing top, you shouldn't be afraid of other people's skin. It's just skin.
Well, yeah, there was a thing. U.S. House Speaker had to weigh in last year after a female journalist was denied entry to the Speaker's lobby for having bare shoulders. It's just, it is a bit ridiculous. It's like, this is the human body. You know, you can open page 3 of The Sun and see it anytime you want. Is it really such a big deal?
Well, actually, you can't anymore.
Well, you can't anymore, okay, but you could.
Yeah. Bring back page 3. I think that's what you're saying.
That's
what we're all saying. Maybe they have. I don't know. I don't read The Sun, for God's sake, Jamie. Have you learned nothing? That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Jamie Timson, Kari Wilkin, and Arion McNicoll. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. That helps others find the show too. Spread the love. For more from us at The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, where you can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday, or you can have the magazine delivered direct to your door. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. I've been Olly Mann. I haven't been wearing a bra. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer is Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.